This is Keys to the Shop, an Encore episode of how to host consumer coffee classes. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFerio, and I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. If it's your first time here, I would encourage you to go to keystotheshop.com. You can find all of our episodes there, except for the shift break episodes, unfortunately, but you can also go to your podcast player and subscribe to Keys to the Shop and just type in what you're looking for by category, by topic, and you can find a ton of content. We have over 570 episodes so far on Keys to the Shop, and it just keeps on coming. So again, I'm really happy to have you along. Don't forget, everyone, to share these episodes with a friend or with your team to spread this content around. Make people aware that Keys to the Shop is a resource for the specialty retail industry to help make it a better one for all. I really appreciate that. Now, on top of doing this podcast, Keys to the Shop offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. Through Keys to the Shop Consulting, I get to work directly with you to help you improve your operations, people, and quality if you're an existing operator, or to help you get started on the right foot if you are on your way to opening your first coffee shop. We can work remotely through consulting and coaching or on-site with training and cafe assessments. And I love to have conversations with prospective clients to talk about what's right for them, to custom fit these services to your needs. And I've been so honored to work with lots of people just starting out or fully established, and it'd be awesome to potentially work with you. So if you're interested in booking a free discovery call to talk about that with me, go ahead and email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and I greatly look forward to having that conversation. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, one of the things I truly appreciate about the industry is that we are all very creative people. So many people are trying to just make coffee better. And one of the groups of people that have done that is Voga Coffee with their amazing brewer, the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer. This is revolutionizing batch brew coffee as we know it. The technology in this machine is award-winning and gives you unprecedented amount of control over the extraction of a range of flavors that was previously not really available through traditional batch brew technology. So this is the next step in batch brewing evolution. And not only does it make amazing batch brew coffee, but it also makes tea, batch iced lattes, batch cold brew. There's a lot of different applications that you can use this machine for in the cafe. So you increase your profitability, your versatility, your quality, all with a small footprint that's easy to train your staff on and looks pretty awesome too. So I would encourage you to go to groundcontrol.coffee to learn more. Truly, if you want to offer your customers the best possible expression of your coffee, I think you need to look at getting a Ground Control Cyclops brewer for your store. Again, to learn more about this amazing machine, go to groundcontrol.coffee. Now, speaking of creativity and being artistic, we love to craft an espresso beverage for somebody. And whether you order regular milk or plant-based milk, you should get the same kind of experience. And that's why I love the Barista series from Pacific. That's the line of plant-based performance beverages that are created for baristas, tested by baristas. That's why they perform so well on the bar. They stand up to the heat from steaming, produce an amazing silky texture for latte art, and the flavor balance is focused on the coffee. Your customers are absolutely going to love it. Go check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com to get samples in your store and try it for yourself. Again, if you want to provide your plant-based customers with a truly quality experience, I think you need to be using the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, we have had a lot of great content on the show, and more is coming up. I'm so excited about the interviews that we have lined up on the topics that we're going to be covering. And I wanted to take a look back in the archives of Keys to the Shop. Again, we have a lot of episodes on this show that have accumulated over 5.5 years. I'm not even sure what the number is right now. It's like 500 and some odd, like 570 episodes, we're including shift breaks and specials in that number, of course. But one of the things that came out of the pandemic was the idea that people really looked at how they can make better coffee at home. We've had lots of guests talk about how to educate consumers, how to make coffee more accessible. And one of the things that I'm always surprised that coffee bars don't do more of is consumer coffee classes. And I'm not just talking about getting people in a room and lecturing them about, elevation and Caldi and the goats and stuff like that. That's fun. But I'm talking about equipping people to be successful with your coffee in their homes. And not just on YouTube, I'm talking about in person, hands-on, the way you would train a barista. And I think that's so magical and effective, whether it's free or paid, it doesn't matter. There are some elements of learning how to do this that I think are critical. And back in 2018, January, we did an episode that was episode number 69 called Hosting Consumer Coffee Classes. And we talked about 7 guidelines that will help you be successful in conducting these. And so I wanted to bring that back because it seems pretty relevant right now. I'm always a big proponent of offering a variety of different ways to interact with your customers, and classes seem like a really good option. And in this episode, we dive into some practical ways to make it happen, have it be organized, have people be happy at the end of it, including you. And I come at this from a lot of personal experience conducting classes and helping other people conduct classes as well. So let's get right to it. Here now is the Encore episode from back in January of 2018, Hosting Consumer Coffee Classes. Coffee classes for your customers. That is what we're talking about today, and it is such an important topic because we talk about educating the customer all the time in specialty coffee. We try to educate the customer with different means. We do it through bag labels, email newsletters, posters, pamphlets, social media, conversations across the bar. And at best, all of these mediums for communicating information pale in comparison to the effectiveness of face-to-face learning. The face-to-face learning experience that you get in a classroom setting is the kind of it's the ultimate buy-in moment. Like if you charge for your classes or you don't charge, either way, people who are there are spending either time or money or both to be in your presence, in your cafe, and listen to what you have to say. It's the ultimate, if you want to educate a consumer about not just coffee in general, but your company and your ethos and the quality of your coffee, etc. There's no reason why you should not be doing coffee classes. I believe every coffee bar, no matter what size, even if you're a drive-through, you can put a patio table out in the parking lot and do a cupping. We should all be doing consumer classes because it's that valuable for a number of reasons. So let's talk about the purpose of a consumer class. Ultimately, the purpose of a class is not just to educate the consumer, but it's to enrich their perception of coffee in general and also your brand, your company. We're giving them an opportunity to dive deeper than they have before, or as deeper than they can over the counter. Most people come into a cafe, the morning fog or the day has just demanded so much of their willpower. They don't have any decision-making ability left. If it's the afternoon or evening, really not the optimum time for people to buy into information. That's why a lot of us are so frustrated from time to time when we really want to talk to somebody about coffee, and we rarely see them in a receptive place. Hosting coffee classes is a perfect way to overcome that kind of barrier. There's a lot of benefits to offering a coffee class. So one of the main benefits is not just that the customer walks away with a great deal more knowledge and a greater appreciation of your brand, etc., but also the people who are teaching the class. And I recommend that you try to involve as many of your staff as possible, reap the rewards of really solidifying the skills that they're learning on the bar in the teaching position. They say that if you really want to learn something, then you should try teaching it, because it forces you to organize the thoughts that you just kind of take for granted. I know that was the case when I started training way back in the Gimme Coffee days in the early aughts. I had to take what I knew about barista work and put it into an organized framework, communicate it effectively, and then the thrill of watching people progress just fed that desire to continue to refine that craft of teaching. But I ended up learning a lot more too. And that kind of an opportunity is an added value for any barista working for you. You can incentivize the process by paying the instructors a little bit extra for their time and expertise in educating the consumer, in hosting the classes. It just creates a more dynamic culture in your cafe for your staff as well. So that is a really big benefit for you. If you are a owner of a cafe and you want to energize your baristas, then offer them the opportunity to teach classes, incentivize the process, and watch the kind of passion that it draws from the staff, and watch the kind of virtuous cycle of value that happens when staff are energized. They're helping your customers have a greater appreciation for your coffee and your brand. It is just a win-win. So now you've decided to start a coffee class. What is it that you should be teaching? There are lots of different subjects that you could cover in your coffee class. In my opinion, this is kind of the hierarchy of effective classes. And by effective, I mean something that has a dramatic impact on both the customer and the company. So number one for me is Brewing 101. That means teaching people about pour-overs, teaching them about proper water-coffee ratios, and all of the different variables that go into brewing a successful cup of coffee at home. So if you sell V60s and you sell Kalidas and whatever else that you might have on your shelves, this is a perfect opportunity to give your customers hands-on time brewing with those devices. Give them the tools that they need to succeed in brewing your coffee in their home. Now, this is beneficial, of course, because it equips people to get more excited about coffee that they purchase from you. And there's a sense of loyalty that's developed as you have given this information to them and hopefully given them tools that create a higher quality coffee at home. And then they buy the highest margin item in your store more often. That's the roasted coffee. So the more roasted coffee you can sell in your cafe, of course, the better. And brewing classes, hands-on brewing classes, you can call them extraction classes, whatever. These are really key in both benefiting the customer and the cafe at the same time. So after this, for your cafe, this might be on the same par, but for me, the next one in line is the Intro to Coffee / tasting class, or cupping. With this one, it's usually a lot less hands-on. There's tasting, and there's more hands-on if it's cupping. And there's different schools of thought in terms of, is cupping more effective, or is just tasting by comparative extraction more effective? You do you, okay? So the allure of cupping is something that people really get into. It's kind of a novel practice that people are attracted to, much like latte art. And it will, not necessarily yield the exact comparison of the coffee cup per cup as tasting will. So if you want people to really identify the flavors the way that your baristas are when they're dialing in your batch brew, for instance, or the pour-overs, tasting and comparing things as they're extracted in the cafe might be the better option. So, it's a give and take, but Intro to Coffee gives you the opportunity to talk to the consumer about the coffee story, about the elements that go into different processing methods, reasons why the Sumatra on the table tastes so different than the Ethiopia, or why do these two Nicaraguan coffees from the same farm taste so different. And we talk about how the different sides of the hill have different types of microclimates and things like that. These classes are really a great medium for you to geek out about agronomy and the variables that go into that coffee before it gets to you at the cafe. And you can do all of this because it's not a skill-based class. It's a cupping class. It's all about them tasting. And you want to be able to provide them the platform to receive information and connect it with what they're tasting. And then a little bit more niche is the espresso and milk class. And I say this because not many people have an espresso machine in their home, so you can get somebody to take the espresso and milk class. And it's not going to necessarily result in that many more whole bean sales, because people don't really go through that much whole bean coffee when they only drink espresso at home. What this type of class does offer, though, is the ability to showcase the skill of your baristas and give people a little bit of a hands-on that makes them a little bit more effective in their own homes for espresso. But it's just a novel experience to teach somebody on commercial equipment. So with an espresso, milk, or latte art class for that matter, you're really engaging in the kind of material that sometimes will be very helpful. If they have that home setup, it'll be helpful to them. But oftentimes it's entertainment value. And a huge part of that is, anybody who's taught knows this is true, an appreciation for what the barista does. The effortless rosettas that the barista pours, the speed of their extractions and how consistent they are, contrasted against the, terrible tamping and blobs of white foam that come out of the pitchers during an hour and a half class for espresso and milk when you're just a customer. It seems cruel, but it's also kind of fun for the customer to try their hand at something that they have a lot of respect for. And I think that they also come out of the class with more respect for what the barista does. In the end, you have these three types of classes. There are many more derivations of these types of classes out there. There's purely latte art classes. There are tasting classes where people bring in food or chocolate or wine or beer or things like that. You can go nuts. Again, do what you do best in your cafe. But the umbrella of teaching, I think, really comes into that brewing class, intro to coffee and / cupping tasting, and then the espresso, milk, and latte art classes. And if you're just starting out in teaching classes, I think why not go for the gusto? Why not go for that brewing class first and, expand from there? That's just my opinion. So let's get into some of the guidelines, some of the key elements I think are important for you to consider when you're doing coffee classes in your cafe. There are 7 things here. 8 really, but we'll get to that. But 7 main things that you're going to want to consider when starting a coffee class, and maybe some of these will help you make your coffee class that you already do a little bit better. So number 1, you have to consider time. Way back in episode 25, we had the pleasure of talking with Dave Stachowiak of Coaching for Leaders about mastering the art of training. And in that episode, time was one of the factors that a trainer has to consider, leaving enough time for people to actually get what you're saying. And if you have a group, then you've got to be able to give enough individual attention for the material so that people don't walk away feeling like they wasted their time or that they were just watching other people be trained while they themselves are doing nothing. It's a really difficult thing to, say, have 6 people go through an espresso and milk class in 1 hour. You probably need like an hour and a half or even 2 hours. I don't know. You've got to allow for enough time for people to absorb the information and feel like they've got their money's worth or their time's worth. If you're doing an espresso and milk class and you say you have room for 6 people and it's only an hour-long class, you're not really going to get much out of that class if you're one of the 6 people. You might consider an hour and a half, and even that might be a little bit too short. But an hour for a cupping, it might be just perfect, depending on your class size. If it's 4 or 5 people, I see no reason why that couldn't be a very good amount of time. And depending on how much information you want to communicate, you're going to want to adjust it up or down. But be conscientious. Use that preemptive hospitality training that you've got when you're working the bar and taking care of people in your cafe, and transfer that hospitality over to predict what people are going to need when they're in the class and schedule the time accordingly. So the second thing that I think is a good guideline for hosting these coffee classes is stick with the core principles. Like in our last episode with Rita Kaminsky and Ant Wallach of Snowdrift Coffee, they had a huge emphasis on the basics and the foundational elements of the craft of coffee. And a consumer coffee class is no different. It would be easy for us to slip into industry speak and niche topics and discussions and launch into these kind of, I would say, contextually irrelevant pieces of information that are interesting to us, but to the consumer, it either looks like we're showing off or it makes them feel dumb and they're just waiting for something to come back around that they can latch on to. So, word to the wise, stick with core principles that are easy to latch on to, repeat them often, and make sure that people get them. Because if you give them the foundational elements that lead to long-term success in whatever you're teaching, you want to stick to core principles in brewing. You want to stick to core principles in espresso and not go off the rails into theory, the things that you might be able to understand, but think about it from their perspective and realize there's only a certain amount of room up in their head for this hour. And if they are overloaded with niche information and they just walk out thinking coffee is complicated, you really haven't done them any favors, and you haven't done yourself any favors either. So that's another really important thing. Stick to those core principles, and your customers will thank you for it. Now, kind of falling in line with the core principles is you have to arrange your class to include a lot of small wins, a lot of small victories for the customer. So this could be done in a number of different ways. One of the points of having a tasting class, for instance, is getting people to taste the difference between coffees. And the oldest trick in the book is to put two very different coffees next to each other and have the customer taste those coffees and comment about those coffees. Comment about how different they taste and get them to talk about it. Back to Rita Kaminsky and Ant Wallach. A lot of good information from last week's episode there. You want to be able to provide an environment that's safe for them to speak their mind about what they're tasting. By putting a Papua New Guinea next to a honeyed processed Colombia or a Sumatra next to a Yirgacheffe, these are the types of things that you can do to really get people to understand, yes, there are differences between coffee, and then talk about those differences. That's a small win. They feel good, and they feel more empowered to believe that they can taste more nuances of coffee than they previously thought that they could. And that's a win. If they even just walk away from that class with that, they're going to look at your menu and they're going to make more educated decisions. Man, this is a great thing for your class. If it's latte art, don't try to get people to pour tulips or rosettas right away. Stick with trying to get them to pour a heart and show them the progress that they're making. Be excited for the progress that they're making. You don't have to lie to them. You don't have to say, wow, that would win a competition. At the same time, be quick to point out where progress is made, and don't set up the game for failure. Set up the game for their success. Because the point is not to make them an expert. The point is to give them key pieces of information that help enrich their coffee skills, coffee appreciation, and their appreciation of your brand as well. The next thing that you're going to want to think about when you're doing classes is what kind of distractions are you going to have to deal with as the leader of the class. So people can come into your class with a ability to derail unintentionally sometimes, just by virtue of their character. They have a lot of questions, maybe they're a bit loud, Some people can just be obnoxious. That's just the way it is. And you can't necessarily kick those people out for asking questions about, $4,000 cups of coffee and Italian espresso being the best, or you ever hear that cat poop coffee, that type of stuff. Maybe they're really excited about coffee and they know a lot about coffee and they want to dive into the details. They really want to get into the nitty gritty, but you're trying to stick to those core principles and those foundational elements of being successful in whatever you're teaching. So my recommendation would be simply to present a strong leadership presence from the beginning of the class and manage expectations right up front. Tell people, here's what we're going to learn today. I'm excited about getting to teach all of this stuff. You could even give them course material right in the beginning to show them where you're going so that you have something to point to when the conversation does get derailed a little bit. Not that you have to police it hardcore, but you can kind of guide things back by gracefully drawing attention to the next thing on the sheet. And honestly, the best policy for things like that is simply to answer the question succinctly and then in the same breath guide the conversation back to the next thing on the list by addressing the entire class. And usually that works for guiding the conversation back to the topic and leading that group well so that they feel taken care of and their questions are answered, but you're still making progress in your class. Now, number 5 on this list of guidelines for your classes is to pay attention to the distribution of information throughout your class. Now, you can do one of two things, really. You can present all of that information that you've got in the beginning and then repeat it throughout the rest of the time, or you can tell everybody the key pieces of information and then layer the rest of the information throughout the remaining minutes. So what that means is this. You've got a bunch of points that you want to make about tasting coffee, and you make all of them before tasting any coffee. And then you start tasting coffee and you reiterate those points. Or you have a bunch of points that you want to make about tasting coffee. You choose the most important ones, say those first, and then wait till key moments, strategic moments in the tasting to bring up more points. So you don't give everything away in the beginning. You give people information as you go. This is actually what I would recommend for hands-on classes because people want a lot of hands-on time. If they're learning how to do a pour-over, they want to have the kettle in their hand as soon as possible. And if you take a lot of time to talk in the beginning, you're going to see people start to get antsy, frustrated. It's going to make you a little frustrated. It's not good. There's some choices with tasting, and yeah, it's a style thing, but it might keep it more interesting to choose those core elements and take those and talk about them in the beginning and then kind of layer and distribute points throughout the class. It keeps it interesting, gives people some time to sort of, accept the things that you just said earlier, and then you give them a little bit more. Yeah, so you have to really be purposeful about the way that you're distributing the information and do so in a way that's conscientious about, what is going to be the most effective for them to retain that information. So number 6 here is once you know kind of the direction that you want to go with these classes, you want to do a tasting class, you're going to focus on some core elements of tasting coffee, and you're going to set people up for these, small wins throughout the time of their tasting, and you've got a printed agenda, kind of a curriculum for that time printed out and ready to go. Now that you've got this set up, you can start to think about the other peripheral elements, like the amount of smallwares you're going to need and the amount of people you're going to need to run the class. It's really easy to get excited about the class and then forget how many kettles you're going to need, or the fact that the lab only has so many outlets for your electric kettles. Some of these peripheral details about how many cups, how many filters do we need, how many Chemexes is very last minute if you're just focusing on the material, and it happens all the time. And your safest bet here is to have a checklist. Each class should just have a checklist of how many smallwares, how many pieces of equipment is needed for each class. And if you have the space to keep those things separated by cabinets or in different places on top of the bar, just make a space for them and keep them there until you have a class. And make sure that people don't take them from the bar to use them. If your classroom is next door to the bar and somebody needs a kettle, sometimes that kettle will migrate to the bar and you'll be ready to do a class and you won't know where the kettle is. And vice versa. If you're ready to do a class and you forget that you need an extra kettle, you're going to go over to the bar and say, I need to borrow a kettle, but guess what's not going to get back to the bar? Just do yourself a favor, and in the process of planning on doing these coffee classes, invest in some extra equipment and keep it separated for that particular purpose, and make a list of the things that you're going to need down to the filters. And that's going to save you a world of hurt. And it's easy to let daily operations of your cafe just, you put off these little things about the classes until you're standing there and somebody says, well, I don't have a kettle. And you say, oh, that's right, I was going to get that extra kettle. So make sure you've got everything set and ready to go for what your class is going to need. Make a checklist, and whoever is doing the class, if that's one of your baristas that you've given the opportunity to teach the class, make sure that they go through the checklist and they have everything they need for that particular course. So finally, number 7 is you want to add some value to the class by offering some kind of swag. It could be a mug, it could be a half pound of coffee that they get to take home with them. I've done everything from that to discounts on equipment. They have a discount code that they can use. If they did the class, they have a discount code they can use to get like 5 to 10% off brewing devices, grinders, things like that. Why do that? Well, again, back to the beginning of this conversation, you want your customers to not only have a good time, be entertained, learn something about coffee, but you want to be able to gain their loyalty even more. Make them a bigger fan of you and your coffee. And if you can make it easier for them to make better coffee at home, and it means they're going to buy more whole bean coffee down the line because they have a better grinder and they're more successful in making coffee, it's a win-win. Again, this is one of those things that it might cost some money up front, but in the long run, it's going to pay you back. So after all this, I think one question is, well, how much do I charge for a coffee class? And my best guess is whatever it takes to cover your cost and give the customer the perceived value that you want them to have. Depending on your clientele, you could price it one way and people will think it's just not worth it because it's too expensive, or you could price it another way and people will not want to take it because they figure it can't be that great because it's free, or it's super cheap. There's a different schools of thought here, but in the end, I think the principle for pricing, ask around, ask your staff, because your staff are members of your community. They could put themselves in the place of a customer or a consumer because before they were your staff, that's what they were. So ask your staff, see what their thoughts are. I think the principle here is that of accessibility. So try to get as many customers through your courses, through your coffee tasting experiences, through your free cuppings and whatnot, all of that stuff. Get them through it as much as possible. Make it accessible. Make it valuable. Give them the tools they need to succeed in brewing and appreciating coffee and you in your company. And you're going to find that it enriches the community that your coffee house already has in the neighborhood and in the relationships in your coffee shop as well. This class is all about the customer. Again, consider this another way of practicing hospitality. There needs to be consistency in how you treat people in this class. This is not an opportunity to just get super casual and buddy with people. You're still representing your shop. You're still representing your customer's perception of your shop, just in a more intimate way. You're taking it to another level. And the customer, by virtue of the fact that they're there and they're not there because they're buying a latte and they're on their way to work, they're there to learn. That's the ultimate buy-in moment. And by providing them a platform to have that, you're really investing in your future and helping them have a good time with coffee as well. So if you're not doing classes, what are you waiting for? You really should. I hope that this episode has done a little bit to inspire you to start something in your cafe. You can do it. You'd be surprised at how much you know when you really sit down and write it out. And you'd probably be surprised at how good of a teacher you are. If you've never tried teaching before and you're a student of coffee and you're a good student of coffee, I'll bet you're probably a pretty good teacher, if not just explainer of coffee. You don't have to be a barista superstar. You don't have to necessarily be an amazing teacher. You just have to have a generous heart and good information to share with people. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. The content is just as relevant now as it was then. I mean, it's 2018 versus 2022. It's not that much time that's passed. People have not really changed that much, and coffee hasn't really changed that much. So I would encourage you to take a look at what you can do in your coffee bar to start entering into offering these types of services, these classes, again, whether free or paid, to your consumers. And I think people really are going to eat it up or drink it up or whatever. They're going to love it no matter what. And it really depends, again, on how prepared you are. And that's what the whole point of this episode was. And I hope that it did, in fact, equip and prepare you. So one of the things I wanted to mention here, though, about being equipped and prepared is, we as professionals need to be equipped and prepared. And one of the places we do that, of course, is podcasts, but also events like Coffee Fest trade shows, of which I've been a part since 2004. And I don't know, it's probably been over 60 Coffee Fests so far, maybe more, but they have been going since 1992. That's 30 years of resourcing and equipping the specialty coffee retail community with what they need to succeed. And so I would encourage you to go to coffeefest.com and look at the upcoming shows and what they have to offer. Our next ones are going to be in Los Angeles and then in Seattle for 2022. And you can get 50% off your registration when you go to coffeefest.com by using the code KEYS when you check out and register yourself and your team for Coffee Fest. Again, that code KEYS gets you 50% off. I'm going to be presenting lectures there. There's trainings, workshops, seminars, of course, the trade show floor, as well as the great community of coffee and coffee competitions. There's so much going on there, and you get to explore great coffee cities all the while. Such an energizing experience. Again, highly recommend that you attend Coffee Fest. Check them out, coffeefest.com. And with that is the end of our episode today, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed this throwback encore episode of hosting consumer coffee classes. And I always enjoy having you along on the show. Don't forget to subscribe and share these episodes. Have an awesome day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.